The other big story for the president-elect today, Time Magazine honoring him as its Person of the Year, but that honor did not come without Mr. Trump sort of being called out, I guess, as being the president of the divided states of America. That's on the cover. So is that a shot? Sabrina Schaefer joins us, Independent Women's Forum Executive Director, and Richard Fowler is here as well, nationally syndicated radio host, also a Fox News contributor. Is it a shot, Sabrina?
You know, I was really not offended by this. I think it's actually sort of an accurate picture of what's happening in the country today. There are a lot of different factions right now, and I hope that some of these rifts will be closed, as we start talking about sensible policies that will unite Americans through greater opportunity and job creation and economic growth. And I think if you read the article and it sort of looks back at all of the candidates who were talking about this problem and who were, in fact, maybe even encouraging it, and we have to remember that over the last 8 years, President Obama has done a lot to pit Americans against one another, and I think that's what we're sort of now seeing in sort of sharp relief today.
Well, here's what the president-elect, when he was on the Today Show this morning, had to say about this, that idea that you were talking about, the divided states. Here he is.
I think putting divided is snarky, but again, it's divided. I'm not president yet, so I didn't do anything to divide. And I will say this, I've now gotten to know President Obama. I really like him.
So that does bring up a larger point, Richard. You know, you could go back and forth about whether he did something to divide it or not, but his point about getting to know and like President Obama, he went on to say that he has spoken to the current president, even consulted him about some of these cabinet selections. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that's a smart move by Donald Trump. If he really wants to bring this country together, then President-elect Trump's going to have to appoint individuals that speak not to the right America, not to the left America, but speak to the entire United States of America. Now, one of those picks that I seem to be pointing in that way, a lot of them aren't, but is this pick of of Homeland Security Secretary Kelly, which you guys will be talking about later on the show. But he is somebody who is sensible, who believes that we have that alcohol, that believes that drugs is not a criminal problem, but a public health problem. He's one pick, but then on the other hand, you have picks like Betsy DeVos, which is the absolute opposite of that. So what Trump has got to do here is really string a very, very tough needle, right? And how he's going to have to do that is try to find candidates or appointees that speak to all Americans and not just a few. Because you have to remember this one thing, that Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote even though Donald Trump won the Electoral College.
Well, here's another one that's just coming in. It was rumored and now being made official. Sabrina, Mr. Trump intends to nominate Linda McMahon, formerly of the WWE, to serve as the administrator of the Small Business Administration. So what do you think of that?
Well, I actually think that that's really interesting. This is a woman who is in charge of the World Wrestling Foundation and has, made a run for Senate herself and developed a big name for herself. I think it's great to see some more, strong women with sort of liberty-minded principles sort of at the helm. And I think it goes to, to Richard's point that we're going to have a sort of a diversity of a cabinet, and that's important, not only because we need to sort of unify the country, but also because for any president, you want advisors around you who are going to challenge you, who are going to make you look at things in different different perspectives. So I think that's an excellent thing that he does not have a unified sort of group of advisors.
It will bring up, Richard, that argument that we've had a number of times before about the wealth in the Donald Trump cabinet. Ms. McMahon is a wealthy woman. I'm not sure if that's good, bad, or indifferent, but that's what people will talk about, right?
Oh, absolutely, and I think she's not the only pick. I think, once again, like I said, Betsy DeVos, who's going to be running the Department of Education, she not only never went to a public school, she never sent her kids to a public school. She has no idea what happens in public schools because she's and once again, Donald Trump, if he's for the American people and he really wants to make America great again, then he's going to have to pick some candidates, to pick some appointees that aren't millionaires and billionaires, and a majority of them.
I think somebody's personal bank account is sort of at the bottom of my concerns. First of all, we've talked about before. This is crazy. I mean, someone like Betsy DeVos is thinking about how she can give individuals more control and ownership over their education dollars. That's something that should be unifying all Americans. That's something wonderful, and I think that we want to see that in healthcare and many other areas.
Time here, guys.
She's used her billions of dollars to support programs that believe in conversion therapy for LGBTQ people. So I have a problem with her spending her money doing policies that make no sense.
All right, that's something we can come back to at some point, but we're running out of time at this point. Sabrina and Richard, thank you guys. And